The way she'd started humming in the morning should have been my first clue. A tuneless, airy little sound like a bird chirping about a worm it had just discovered, except the worm in this scenario was another man and I was oblivious, busy making breakfast and packing lunches. Josie had always been a morning grump. The humming was a jarring anomaly, like a rogue color in a perfectly coordinated room, but I was happy to see her happy, or so I thought. Then came the secret getaway. She'd started using the phrase jokingly at first, almost like a bad movie line. "No, just a little secret getaway, darling, you wouldn't understand," she'd say with a wink, grabbing her purse and heading out. At first, it was a trip to the nail salon or shopping with her sister, harmless. Then the secret getaway started to get longer, to include overnights. "It's a wellness retreat. I need to reconnect with myself," she said, her eyes shifting to the side just a fraction. That's when the tiny seed of N sprouted into a prickly vine in my gut. But I, the fool, told myself not to be an insecure husband, that it was likely me just being overly cautious. The giggling became more frequent as she'd be on her phone, head tiled down, and this high-pitched, almost manic giggle would bubble up. When I asked what was so funny, she brushed it off with a "oh, just silly messages from the girls, nothing important," except I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen the way she locked her phone when I entered her room, the way her thumb hovered a little too long over the screen before putting it down. It wasn't like her at all, and as someone who knew her for over 15 years, her behavior was definitely not right. It was a Tuesday evening when I decided I'd had enough of being kept in the dark. I'd spent the day at work running through spreadsheets, my mind more focused on my wife and what she was doing than the numbers on my computer screen. I knew she was supposed to be at her book club that night, a relatively new occurrence that began when her other excursion started. I'd even caught her looking at a new dress in the mirror before she left, twirling like a teenager with that same damn giggle escaping her lips. The book club was at a friend's house, and I knew her well enough to know that her friend wouldn't be at home, because I had seen the friend with her kids at the park that afternoon. So instead of heading home, I drove straight to the address of the book club, my heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of dread and fury wearing within me. As I neared the street, I spotted her car parked a few houses down, practically hidden behind a large bush. I parked a bit further down and walked the rest of the way. The house was dark except for the faint glow of a single lamp from a window near the back of the property. As I got closer, I could hear soft music and the murmur of voices, and then I saw them through the slightly parted curtains. Josie and another man. They were close, far too close. Their heads bent together, his hand resting on her back as she laughed. My blood turned to ice and then molten lava. I didn't storm and I didn't bang on the door, not yet. I was too numb to act, my mind racing to grasp the reality of what I was seeing. For a moment, I just stood there, my hand pressed against the cold brick of the wall, trying to understand what was happening. The betrayal, the sheer disregard for our vows, our lives, crashed over me in a tidal wave. I retreated back to the car, my edition blurry, my hands shaking. I couldn't go home and face her now, not like this. I drove around aimlessly for a few hours. When I finally returned home, it was just after midnight. The lights were still on. She was likely still not home. Thinking she had successfully fooled me, I went inside. The silence of the house amplifying the turmoil within me, I waited, not with anger but with a quiet, cold resolve. She came home around 2 a.m. looking flustered, her cheeks flushed and still dressed in that new dress. "Oh, you're still up," she said, her voice a bit too cheery, a forced casualness that made my stomach churn. "Yes, I am," I said simply, my voice dangerously calm. She walked in a little further, putting her purse down, and finally noticed that there was something off. "You sound strange. Is everything okay?" I didn't answer her right away. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in what felt like months. Her eyes, once so loving and kind, now felt like the eyes of a stranger, cold and calculating. I pulled out my phone. "You want to see what I've been doing since leaving the office today?" She laughed nervously. "Of course not. What are you doing?" she said, walking towards me and trying to take the phone out of my hand. I pulled it back out of her reach. "Don't worry, it's all family friendly. I'm just trying to understand why you didn't tell me your little book club was at a different location tonight." I pulled up the video, a short 20-second clip of her with her lover at the house, a clear view of them cuddling, laughing, and kissing. It wasn't grainy, it was perfectly clear and perfectly incriminating. Her face drained of all color. What is this?" she stammered, her hands flying up to her mouth. The giggling was gone, replaced by a terrified whisper. I showed her another and another, each one a clear indication of her betrayal. The reality of my discovery had finally caught up to her. I'd never seen her this scared. It was as if her entire world was collapsing Around her the facade she had carefully crafted for all those months had completely shattered, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. "Who is it, Josie?" I asked, my voice a low growl. She didn't answer, her eyes darting around the room, as if searching for an escape route. "Tell me now," I demanded. I held out my hand and she flinched. It was a small gesture, but it confirmed her fear. Finally, the truth spilled out of her, a pathetic string of half-truths and weak excuses. "It was a mistake," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "It didn't mean anything. It was just something that happened." My rage was a cold, heavy thing, but I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a large, thick folder. "I've been busy today, to Josie, while you were having your secret getaways," I said, as I dropped the folder onto the coffee table between us. I opened it, each page a carefully documented truth. My truth. The first page was a detailed timeline of her excursions, each one carefully cataloged with dates, times, and locations, leaving nothing unturned. "I've been tracking you and documenting everything," I said, pointing to the pages. Her eyes widened as she scanned the contents, her breath catching in her throat. She had no idea, and she was now coming to realize the level of detail I had gone into. I turned the page again. "Here, Josie, is a detailed log of all of our shared assets, our home, our savings, our investments, everything," I stated coldly. The next few pages had lines and lines of text, each one stating a particular asset and how it was going to be divided. "And here," I said, turning another page, "is the divorce paperwork finalized and ready to be signed. I've already spoken to a lawyer and filed it, and we're getting divorced." Her mouth dropped open and her eyes began to water. Her carefully crafted life, the one built on lies and deception, was about to crumble. I watched impassive as she reached for the papers, her fingers trembling as she opened each page. Her sobs became louder as she came to realize how meticulous and final it all was. There were no arguments or excuses left, no way out. She had been caught thoroughly, and she was about to face the full consequences of her actions. Finally, I held out a pen, the cheap pen, the one from the supermarket, like the life she had created with another man. "Sign him, Josie," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. I watched as she took the pen, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it, and with a final pitiful cry, she said, "Mine." She barely glanced at the document. She just knew that it was over. She crumpled to the